Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the relentless geekery.
Very good. Let me do my usual shutting down stuff so that I know that we have the most memory possible.
Yeah, because I know how finicky those Macs can be.
Let's see if I need to check this. Okay, get rid of monitor, get rid of music. Don't be distracted by investments. Okay, there we go.
One thing after another.
Well, it's kind of funny. I often have screens open to things that I really shouldn't be checking every day, hour, minute, and yet I'm always reading and learning, and so it I I kind of I don't know, one of the reasons that I like having multiple monitors and big ones is because I like scanning. I like looking at what deserves my attention, and instead of it being that I already have it set up to exactly inject things into my life, it's kind of like the way you read a newspaper instead of other things. I always like being able to page through, and when something catches my eye, then I go deeper into it. But I don't read it cover to cover because not everything is worthy of my attention.
Right.
You know what I mean? So anyway, okay.
Bar Harbor. Hey, been there. Good place.
Indeed, this was honeymoon for us.
Nice.
We had a wonderful time. We actually drove from Cleveland to Bar Harbor by way of Niagara Falls. And so, we did the very traditional, hey, let's go to the falls, let's ride the Maid of the Mist. I don't know, I had been there before, but only to view the falls. I hadn't really wandered around the town, and it's a wonderful tourist trap. You know what I mean? It's got let's see, Believe It or Not Museum and the Wax Museum and and it's got mini golf and it's got everything in the world to eat and stuff like that. So we had a really nice time.
Yeah.
And in Bar Harbor, we actually went we had a nice bed and breakfast that I had arranged for with the big 4-poster bed. And the town of Bar Harbor is also touristy, but ocean quaint. You know what I mean? It's not totally there to separate you from your money. So we had the Bar Harbor Inn, and Colleen had some of the best coffee of her life, and we went whale watching and saw like a mother with a calf, which is
nice.
really cool how cute a 10-ton animal can be.
And it's very dog friendly. I mean, if you're a dog owner, that's the place to go.
Yeah. In fact, one of our most fun things was we were all packed up and heading out of town, and the tide went out, and we had not walked the bar yet. It's named Bar Harbor because the tide is changeable enough that you actually get a connection between the shore and an island.
Right.
And so we turned around after seeing it and went over to park where we could, and we walked the entire bar, and the tide changes quickly enough that by the time we got back to land, it was no longer like 10 yards wide. It was a sidewalk wide. We were like, right. Okay, we timed this, without knowing what the hell we were doing. We timed this just right.
Like an action movie, you got to start running or you're going to get overpowered.
Exactly. The big ball is coming, the bridge is collapsing, whatever else it might be.
Right. So, speaking of trips, this weekend, there's something we're getting together for. It's like the first thing you and I have gotten together in quite a while for.
Exactly. It's so I remember I stumbled onto it last year. There's a company called Clued Up that does big live clue games, and they pretty much learn your city. They do it all over the United States. I'm not sure, probably dozens of different cities, but in Cleveland, they take over is the wrong term. They inhabit downtown, but they really know enough about it that you play live clue, teams of I think 6 people. And it's done on your phones or whatever video and net connection you can get, so that they have little videos that are the various different people kind of either making confessions or being grilled by police or that equivalent stuff, and it keeps guiding you from place to place. It offers you clues as to this person was last seen at the oldest bar in Cleveland, and then you kind of have to know that or be able to look it up quickly to go to the Stonewall Inn or whatever else it
Right,
might
right,
be.
right.
And we had a wonderful time with it last year. And the whole point is like there's a whole bunch of other teams that are doing it simultaneous with you. Um, and it runs from like 9 to 2. And it's not that everybody starts at 9 and there's huge crowds and stuff. They actually give you different staggered starting places so that it's non-linear. You pick up clues from all these various different locations and try to get to, who done it and why. And so we figured it out, but we were like 18th place or something like that. You know what I mean? We really did apply ourselves and run around and that kind of stuff. But there's people that must have done it before or read about it being done, because we just kind of showed up in casual hot weather clothes. There were people that were dressed up in Sherlock Holmes capes and
Nice.
deerstalker caps,
That's
and
perfect.
or other like that were the blues. I'm sorry, the Clues crew. I'm trying to think what there's a show with like Dora the Explorer or somebody that does this like so.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it really was fun enough that when it was coming back to Cleveland, I thought I'd love to do this again, and I'm glad that we could invite you along this time because I think it's going to be just as much fun. You
Yeah.
know,
And it's interesting because this is kind of like a halfway stopgap or something between like staying at home with board games and the AR games like Harry Potter and Pokemon. It's
exactly.
all live and you're out like the AR games, but it's not. It's partly, you know, digital based.
Yeah, it's funny. It's not AR yet, which I really am hoping for that version. That while you're walking around, you actually like hold your phone up, and then there's a little character that's talking to you, imposed on the steps of the library, or something like
Right, right.
superimposed. You know what I mean? And there's things that are very similar to that. The video you're watching is of someone having done that in that place, so it's not happening in real time, if you will. But I just, without going into detail, they were very, very clever about how they used the terrain, how they knew that there'd be lots of people around. And so another factor of it is, you're kind of competing, but you're also cooperating. It's like, I don't know. We tended to be, maybe that's why we finished 18th, is because we didn't hide the fact when we saw something. We were like, aha, and people would come running over and see what the heck we had discovered. So
You get outside, you get with some people, you have a good time. That's how you really win. I mean, who really cares? Because you probably couldn't find
absolutely.
anybody that remembers who won last year except the people who won.
That is a
So
great way to put it. Exactly. The fact that we really, while you're doing it, it's a very immersive experience. All your brains are firing and you're having little discussions. What does that mean? And actually, when we got to the solution between the 6 on the team, we really had to vote on. There was just enough ambiguity, just enough like, well, we got to all the clues, but there's still not, it's not a linear thing where you're going to get exactly to the answer. So we kind of had to vote as to who do you trust of these witnesses so that their testimony is going to be what tips the scales in terms of we think this person did it. And luckily, honestly, I think it was like 4-2. It wasn't 3-3, and then we had a fist fight. I think we actually came out to we figured it out. And so that was at least very satisfying that we
yeah,
didn't fall for the most red of the red herrings. And so I don't know, also to see, kind of like doing an escape room, you get to
right.
see all people have all different kinds of ways their brains work. And so some people love that. Find the thing different among these things. Some people are, what's different about this historic scene? They know enough about, um, fox hunting that you can say, well, that's not authentic. And so it was really cool to see everybody contributing, everybody's mind clicking away, and boom, these little epiphanies, these little revelations. It was very adrenalizing, and I'm looking forward to it. So I hope
Nice.
you guys have a good time, and I hope
Yeah.
that it matches up to my hype that I've now built up
Well,
for
no,
it.
hey, just getting together with some people, getting out and doing something because, things have just been so crap this year. I mean, just seriously,
Yeah,
for us, even worse than last year, it seems. But if it's any consolation, when we play Clue here at the house,
yeah.
Gina beats everybody. I mean, to the point where I still have, okay, I've got 4 weapons left and 2 people, and she just solved it. It's like, how the hell did you do that?
Yep.
She clicks with it so well. So she'll probably really get into it.
So she might be our secret weapon.
Yeah,
She's got that perfect like combination of induction and deduction that gets you to what do you know and what can you eliminate, and then it all kind of funnels into.
right.
That's very cool.
So,
That's
yeah.
how cool. All right.
And, that reminds me, and this is kind of a segue. Back in the day, I remember on Sega Genesis with CD, there was
Hmm.
a Sherlock Holmes game, and it was very much like that, but it was played through the console. But it
Okay.
came with like a newspaper they made up for the game. It came with this journal with entries, and it had physical things to go with it
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
look stuff up. Now, yeah, you could read through it all, but a lot of it didn't make sense till you got to that point in the game. And
Exactly.
this, is kind of like the live version of that. Um,
It's very comparable, like you're saying. Also, what I thought it was, I mean, I've been to a couple of murder mystery parties, where they have the actual, like a 3M boxed game that was even called How to Host a Murder or something like that. And they're also, like you said, they're very clever in terms of, here's the little clue, and you really have to look at the object to say, so this is a Latin phrase. What does that mean? And all that kind of cool stuff. I've also been to a couple, not in your own home, but where you go to a restaurant and they host a murder mystery party. And they've actually got people that you don't know they're not guests until they stand up and like, I accuse you because you fooled around with my husband. And and,
right,
and it's sometimes, I mean, they're meant to be a little over the top. You know what I mean? The people that are
right.
playing actors and actresses. Actually, we have a good friend, J.R. Simons, who runs a company called, I think it's Hilarities. I'm sorry if I get you wrong, JR, but he has hosted those where it really is people from his acting troupe. So they really are good at character and good at not kind of being over the top and being, well, you can't trust her. So if someone that, just lost something like their daughter, they really look heartbroken about it. And anyway, he has done really good ones like that. And so hopefully that's another thing that post COVID we'll get a revival of. That's exactly the kind of thing where when someone starts speaking, everybody in the room crowds around. Well, that's just what you
Right.
don't want to do. Let's go to the
So,
super spreader murder mystery
so
party. You
just
know what I
invite
mean?
the people you don't like and put them all in the room
Really?
to solve the the puzzle.
That's a good movie. You know what I mean? Where they really do put people that we don't mind these people getting off. Let's invite them to
Right.
this.
Yeah. So the game on the console, the reason I mentioned that is because
Yeah.
I just got done listening to an audiobook that you should check out. It's called
Okay.
Console Wars.
Okay.
And it is a book, but I listened to the audiobook. And it
Hmm.
actually was a like Tribeca Film Festival movie also, and it won
Cool.
awards and stuff. Basically, what it's about is the war between Sega and Nintendo in the late 80s to early 90s. And
Okay.
it's done in a very narrative fashion, almost like a fiction book, but it's all nonfiction. And
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
just very engaging. And then I told a friend of mine that he said he's listened to it like 4 times. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to check this out. I told him, I said, I know how this ends. I mean, obviously, 20 years ago, I know what happened to Sega and where Nintendo is at. So I know how this
Right.
ends. And I'm still listening to it going, okay, what's going to happen next? And I'm cheering for Sega. It's like, come on, you guys can do this. Um,
Yeah.
so
It's
very
kind of
good.
cool. Without knowing a thing about it, I can imagine. I mean, it really is like um, human nature is such that you're going to have the people are going to do industrial sabotage to steal secrets. There's so much money involved that like whatever they do to get the big titles and how they outbid each other for who's going to develop for the various different platforms. I can kind of think of what elements would I when I saw it coming out, like the big blockbuster announcements, and the first time that I had read, wow, this thing going on sale made more money in its first weekend than this blockbuster movie that just came out.
Yeah.
And so you got an idea of there really were big stakes, and that I don't know, nerds growing up, kind of like Ready Player One, which we just talked about a while back. It really is. They were really brilliant at what they did, but they weren't necessarily businessmen. And so you hope that they were able to run things well enough, or that the professional managers they brought in weren't total sharks about it and people got pushed aside. And so I imagine there's some of those elements.
Yes. And you should really listen to it because the respect I got for the guy that took over at Sega and brought them out of the pits. Um,
Okay.
it's I mean, of course I know it's fictionalized, so people, oh, that's not how it really, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I get that there can be lots of elements that may be a little fudged or something. Great, I get
Okay.
that, but I don't think it was heavy handed either way. That these are bad guys and these aren't bad guys. It was fairly evenly dispersed as good and bad, and they
Very
didn't
good.
show
Yeah.
either of them in a great light or a horrible light. uh, and,
Uh-huh.
and the
You know,
biggest what
no, no,
uh,
it's go ahead.
oh, I was going to say the biggest two things I pulled out of it are the differences between America and Japan business relations and how it relates to their culture. And
Sure.
ultimately, that's what killed Sega, was because the Japanese part of the company couldn't take the fact that the American part of the company was doing better than they were. And so they
Wow.
seriously said, no, you can't do this, that, or the other thing. It's like, but we went from like 1 million a year to 2 billion a year.
Right.
And
Look
now
at the
you're telling,
numbers. Look at the
yeah.
exactly.
And they're like, no, sorry, we're taking control of all of it. And where that went. So it's
Okay.
just interesting that, and I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just the differences in culture and where the thoughts and focuses lie. And
Yeah.
then the other great thing about it was just listening to Sega starting out with basically nothing, and how they changed it and turned it around. I'm like, wow, that is a blueprint for any small business fighting the big guys. Here's what you do, you know?
Interesting. Yeah,
So,
I'll tell you, boy, I have a whole bunch of thoughts zipping through my head. One thing that I've read is, and you mentioned it, Japanese competition, when it started to go outside their borders and come into the United States, there was a culture clash, and they were a little tone deaf sometimes as to how to sell a video game, how to sell a car. They're very systematic in terms of how they continually learn more, make improvements, move forward. One of the things, this isn't just anecdote, I know I've read this. Many Japanese companies started to include in their meetings a person that would take the role of the loud American. In Japanese culture, there's a lot of deference and face hierarchies and so forth, and they needed someone that would just speak up and say, "Well, that makes no sense. Well, that's not going to appeal to kids. That's stupid." They needed someone that would break through that accumulation of little yeses that lead to maybe a big no, a big untruth, but nobody's willing to
right.
defy authority. And so I know I've read about that. Another thing that I love is there's been all kinds of cool documentaries coming out that are like about things that have happened in my life. It used to be documentaries were about, let's learn more about World War One and
Right.
things that that kind of thing. But video games wise, I've seen a cool documentary about Donkey Kong,
Uh,
about the people that were like obsessive about competing over it and that practiced and
Still,
practiced and got to the 300th screen. I know I'm not being accurate, but where they played like a perfect game and here's how to get the perfect score. And that to be able to do that, not in the privacy of your perfect little cocoon you've created at home, but in the middle of a big, convention center when there's boop, boop, lights and people all around you, and still be able to maintain that kind of focus. So I think one's called The King of Kong.
yes.
Um,
Yep.
we watched a show that's like the toys that made us, like 8 episodes where they talk about here's the various different things, and especially that world of toys and video games. It's so much about like fads, about catching lightning in a bottle, and how do you do it? How do people create something, and then when they see it start to catch on, are they able to capitalize, and are they able to like keep the momentum going and make Pet Rock 2 or whatever else it might be? And so they're very interesting because it's not just, of course, about the toys. It's about the American mindset, or can you go international, or like how shameless do you have to be to plunge every single dollar into this possibility, but then if it pays off so handsomely
Yeah.
that there are people that have become like serial fad builders. They're the tastemakers, and they seek out the teens and the early 20s, whatever the market demographic all seems to be. We care about people from 16 to 25. And like, I guess that is kind of like when you look at movies and games and all kinds of stuff, there's a sweet spot for fads work there.
Right.
Money is just starting to be made and they're willing to pay it and all that kind of stuff. So there's a science, if you will, to that phenomenology. And it's a little weird to see people being so mercenary about it. But when they're successful about it 10 times over, it's like someone really knows how to like create a fad that it didn't
Yeah.
really come out of nowhere. They,
And
they fed it. You know what I
and
mean?
the guy that took over for Sony of America, he
Okay.
was that guy. He revived
Okay.
Barbie in the early 70s, or mid 70s. That Barbie was basically on its way out. They were going to get rid of the Barbie line, and he revived it. And
Interesting.
then he and his team went on to create He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
That's one of the toys that made us things where they,
Yeah.
especially that like action figures, before when they were called dolls, then they
Yeah.
became action figures and stuff like that.
Right.
And the vocabulary of how to speak of those things, so they go from like hush puppies became uncool, and then by making hush puppies are dumb. It's funny, memes get in your head and they stay there forever.
Right.
And so it's kind of funny to be how do we break through the, oh, that's old fashioned, that's for kids, that actually like college kids start having those things. And then that
Right.
is exactly your sweet spot demographic.
And
It's
GI
fascinating.
GI Joe went through that because the ones in the '60s were like the foot high dolls, and there were like, you know, 6, 7 of them, different ones where they moved a
Exactly.
little bit. They revived that in the '80s to the whole miniature figures with a million commando toys and
Exactly. All the
everything.
accessories, all the
Yeah.
characters, and boy, there is an episode that's all about that. Like when you make something collectible, you tap into that hoarding thing that, well, I must have one to end of something. Boy, you got a built-in market. I don't know what the size of it is, but they are the fanatics that really will. They'll show up at 5 in the morning before the
Yes.
store opens. They will tell all their friends kind of smugly, oh yeah, I got every one of those. You know what I mean? Like, and there's a self-fulfilling tornado of
Oh God,
wants.
yes. When I
you know?
worked at Target,
Okay.
every day they'd be lined up out on two. They knew the trucks came in Monday night, and we were unloading it, and so they would be
Oh
there
boy.
Tuesday morning at the door. The minute it opened, they'd race and come running and start digging through the stuff because this was right around the time episode 1 was coming out,
Oh
and
boy.
you had all the collectors there, and these guys are like, oh yeah, and literally they're just taking everything off the shelf into their baskets, you know, and
Right,
going.
buying multiples because they know
Yeah,
they'll be able to resell them.
but
Oh boy.
they weren't. I mean, I'm looking at them going, wow, this was, you know, when people just started discovering the collectible, you know, at the end of the
Yeah,
'90s.
yeah.
And I'm looking at them going, they're like, oh yeah, this is going to be my kids' college tuition. I'm like, you mean you're spending your kids' college tuition?
Right.
Because even back then, I'm looking at going, well, hold on, wait a second. There's 300 Darth Vaders on the shelf. Why do you think those are going to be worth money? And you're taking every single one.
Right. And there's 3,000 Target stores. So there's a
Exactly.
million, a million
Yes.
darts out there. How is that going to get to scarcity?
Yeah. And you know, as an aside, that line of figures that came out at that time,
Yeah.
most of them are worth less than when they were new. So
Oh boy.
yeah,
So I mean, that's as a collector, it's often been the luck of getting in on something early, where it was nobody knew about it. It was scarce for the first, in my case, comic book 6 issues, and then it took off. But it's like they don't keep reissuing those things necessarily. And even if they do, they kind of have to say this is second edition. So it's I know if you want to just play with them, it doesn't matter whether you have version 1 or version 2. But if you're a collector, it really is, oh no, that's got the green belt and the blue belt is the one you want. You know what I
right,
mean? It's
right.
it's weird the level of differentiation that people will make to get, I don't know, cash, not money, but oh, I have something that you don't have, kind of neener, if you will.
Right.
Never had the action figure thing. You know what I mean? People have given me things, and I've often put them on my desk because who doesn't want to have? I'm cool. I got Batman, but I I think I've talked about this a number of times. I know I have kind of that collector thing, that addictive personality, and when you just dip your toe in and you find out there's 100 of those, I didn't want
Right.
to say, "Wow, another thing that I have to have all of," and so I don't even
Yes.
want to start. You know what I mean? It's
There's a couple Star Wars games that are
okay.
miniatures with miniature ships, the miniature Starfleet cruisers,
Yeah,
just just tons of little miniatures to buy. But there's like 3 different games that encompass that. And we were at the store one day, and Gina's like, "Oh, come over here." And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Oh, just see all that." Yeah, I saw all that. She's like, "Well, that's cool. Why don't we get some?" I'm like, "Hell no, that's like $5,000 to get this stuff, and I can't get these two.
right.
Stay
If
away.
you're
I
a
don't even want to think
completist,
about it."
exactly. You know what makes it still makes me sad? I've read every one of my comic books. I was never the guy to buy them and tuck them in a bag and like hermetically seal them. And so they must, they're all red. They all have some. I've been careful. I didn't read with white gloves, but I've never been the guy that spilled a drink on them either.
Right?
Having said that, there's all manner of things where like they you see on eBay. This is the first He-Man mint in box. And it's like you never even took it out. You didn't like have a grr and have that little fight with Skeletor and stuff. It seems that buying to just own it, not to like have fun with it. One of the reasons I love comic books as opposed to coins or stamps or other known collectibles is there's more to it. You take it out and you read it and you get a whole bunch of entertainment out of it instead of you just like, okay, this is a cool stamp. And then you flip it over. It's like, that's the glue side. And then you're kind of done. Maybe you can go in there with the microscope. I just, I've always had reasons to choose between various different things. I like coins because there's so much history to them. You kind of got to know, this is the mint that it was struck, and here's the story behind who's on it and that kind of stuff. But there was enough more about comic books that I really liked. I was buying the entertainment, and it being a collectible was kind of secondary. And now it might help that it is, but back then it was just because I loved the stories. I loved the heroic
Right.
fiction, so.
Right. And I get torn with that because people are like, oh, don't open it. It's worth so much more. But I look at it, I'm like, okay, this whatever figure, it's worth $30. Is that going to
Mhm.
change my life? If I go live on in
See,
a Tahiti island that I own, no, I'm not.
another great way to put it. And that's even with Antiques Roadshow and all the places that have been trying to show, hey, collectibles, you never know what's going to be worth it. You know that just the laws of supply and demand, of scarcity, that it's something that has a million copies. A million moms would all have to throw that away for the one kid that kept it to get any
Right.
kind of real value on it.
Right.
And it's not going to happen within 20 or 30 years. Like you buying it when your kid is born and the thing that's going to be his college fund, things don't really go scarce in 18 years, 16
Yeah.
years. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That takes like
The,
1930s comics are scarce now because there were paper drives for the war. Their paper only lasts so long. There's built-in factors that you can take into account to say where you're going to get real scarcity. Sometimes they do artificial scarcity. This is a limited edition of 1,000, signed and numbered, so we know there's not going to be more than this lithograph or something like that.
right.
And I guess that's a way of building it. I mean, you've been doing that with plates and spoons and all kinds of things for forever. Hummels, you know what I mean?
Right.
There's a new one each year, and anyway.
And with the figures, like the Star Wars specifically, the original release of figures, those are worth money because there weren't that many of them, and
Right.
nobody bought them thinking, "Oh, I'm going to resell this because it'll be worth something." Because it's just, oh, they're toys. That's what made them. It was after that people were like, "Oh, I'm buying everything." But like the Empire Strikes Back, Yoda and Boba Fett, if you have those in the thing, those are worth chunks of money, like
Right, because
significant.
nobody did that. Nobody bought it and then
Yes,
didn't play with it. Exactly.
exactly. I saw a Boba Fett in the whole case and everything, fairly good shape, not 100% mint, but fairly good, and it was like
Yeah.
$1,500. So,
Wow.
but but
Wow. See,
but if I bought every figure, I probably spent $700 or $800 back in the 80s.
honestly, and to me, like having the other 90 things for the same amount of money, I've always been the guy that I don't want the one perfect concentrated thing. I like having the set of them, if you will. And one day eventually maybe I'll luck into and finish my collection with that. But I've always been the one that kind of like wanted to have more instead of a single perfect thing. And that's, Colleen and I were just talking about this. One of the things about like jewelry, for instance, is I never wanted to own anything that if it like fell down the drain and went away, that I would just start crying.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I guess having my collection of comics, oh my God, that's treasure. In order for someone to steal my treasure, they don't break in 2 minutes, find it, and walk out. They got to back a truck up to my house. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Right.
So there's some safety. And of course, that's not really true now that I know I have a specific, but they'd have to know which those specific things were. When you read about people, a comic store getting broken into and things stolen, you've narrowed your field of possible felons if they knew exactly what to steal. Because
Right.
that's not at all public knowledge. That's very specific, comic collector. Even if someone gave you the list of what to steal, you wouldn't know it by sight. If you're going to get in and out in 5 minutes, you got to be able to go boop, boop, boop and take exactly those things.
Right.
So that's always been some, I don't know, solace to me, is that when you have a lot of things, you don't have to. I don't have that fear. I mean, I guess I could have a fire. That would be my tragedy. Would be, wow, it
Yeah.
got everything. I had
Yeah.
a tornado sweep through and scatter. Luckily, I don't live in Tornado Valley, and we're pretty careful about fire. But I would hate that.
Yeah.
That would be the heartbreaking thing. It's like, oh man, we had a flood, and
Well, and that reminds me of an episode of Big Bang Theory where Leonard and Sheldon, their apartment gets broken into. And they walk in, they're like, "Oh my gosh, the TV's gone, our computers are gone." Sheldon goes, "Oh no!" and he runs, and he comes back and goes, "It's okay, they didn't take my comics."
see, exactly.
The computers, those can be replaced. We back those up. That's what you do.
That's
Oh
right.
man, don't
This
take the
is what's
comics.
irreplaceable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So speaking of all this swag, here's a good
Mhm.
segue again. What are you getting Colleen for her birthday this year? You always have interesting items.
So, and it's kind of fun, it's her birthday is today, and we haven't done birthday gift opening yet because I let her sleep in, and now we're doing our podcast, so we're going to do it afterwards. But one of the joys of having a a relatively good memory or having a phone that you can jot things down into is all kinds of things get mentioned over the course of
Yes.
years, and then you get a chance. Oh, well, that. So I got, for instance, we both love comedy. And so there's often nowadays people that are in comedy that are writing books, either their jokes or about their lives or about what makes comedy comedy. And so I got like a Jerry Seinfeld book called "Is This Something? Is This Anything?" That it's about the act of joke writing, and that it's not easy.
Oh,
You
wow.
really have to be that person that's able to take in all of what you hear around you and do that little twist, and then you try it out on other comics. That's the "Is This Anything?" And it's very interestingly written. Instead of paragraphs, it's like everything is a line, as if everything is this anything? Is this a punchline? Is this a way of set up and get into the punchline? And so, because I like his work, and I think he really has been provedly perspective. He's got great perspective. He's got real ability to do that little. It's often called like the comedy of nothing. He looks at all the little day-to-day things, but he's the one that can tell you why it's funny that the noise that the espresso machine makes is really attractive to some people and really irritating to others, or whatever. There's all kinds of things. So I got that. I got a book by Rachel Dratch, who was on SNL for like 7 years, was on 30 Rock. She's good friends with Tina Fey, and so has been in all kinds of cool improv and stuff and some of our favorite characters, but was never the one to make the big movie. And sometimes that's who you want, is you don't want the Clint Eastwood book who is the star and he's got that star perspective. You want like the Peter Ustinov book, who was in on everything, but was always kind of the secondary player off to the side, but he's so witty and such a great raconteur of these stories that so that's what I'm anticipating from this. It's like her life in comedy and how life in comedy is not all of life and what's happened to her before and after. Oftentimes you'll find out that comedians are pretty tragic in how they came up, and the comedy
Yeah.
was the way they got through it, the way that they, and I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know if this is the case, but it's often the case for Freddie Prinze or others that kind
Right.
of they never defeated their demons. Robin Williams kind of took himself away because when he was finding out that he couldn't do what he loved doing at the height of his powers, it was it was breaking his heart, and Brian broke our heart by
Yeah.
seeing
Yeah.
him go away. So, um, got she really loves the Little House on the Prairie books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Well, I found a parody book called Little House on the Wasteland,
Nice.
and so it's like the survivalist zombie fight post, the dystopian future, and
With
uh,
pigtails.
I. Exactly. I hope she likes it. There's a couple things that I got that are like, you hope she will. I would like it, and so this is very funny. We often give each other things like, okay, when you're done with that, I'd like to read that too.
That's been my philosophy. I told the kids, if I get you something that I like, it's a win-win.
Exactly. It's I got she's needed a new alarm clock for a while, and she's had, in my opinion, a little bit of analysis paralysis where she wants to go to the stores and look at them and listen to them and that kind of stuff. And so I tried to find one that was like, it has adjustable volume, adjustable illumination, the how light it is, and big letters so you can see it in the dark. And so for all those reasons, I think that this will be one that she'll like, even if she hasn't seen it before. But this really could be something that's like, well, put it back in the Amazon box. We're sending it back. It might not be to her taste, and so we'll
Yeah.
see. I always get her some music, and in this case, this is a really fun one. I got her. I always try to get her some things that she's not had before. So first, I got her Adele a while back, and now that Adele, as she puts out albums, I keep on getting her Adele albums. There's a really good prog rock vocalist called the Anchoress that I've read good reviews of, and so I got her a couple of those, thinking that that will match her taste. And here's the cool breakthrough of the year. When we talk about favorite concerts we've ever seen, we once saw a double bill with Joe Jackson and Todd Rundgren, where it was kind of like the unplugged versions. They sat down at piano and on guitar and did not the orchestrated rock versions of songs, but
Nice.
the perfect, like them as a player, them as an artist, if you will. And she talks to this day about how much she loved that show. Well, thank God someone captured that show. I think in like the Roadhouse in New Jersey or something. I don't remember exactly, but I got that for her. I got that like the
Nice.
3 CD set with there was an opening act, then there was each of them, and then they actually came together for a couple songs. And our memories of that are just how much we were blown away with how talented and musical and the rapport they had with the audience. That it was all just so wonderful. And now, instead of only having the memory, we really can say that is how it is. Like I remember, it
Right.
really was
That's cool.
amazing. So I'm
Those are the
hoping,
cool gifts.
and just a couple other books and stuff like that, but mostly it was books and music this year. I often get her clothing, and yet nothing struck me this year. She hadn't dropped any hints as to um, what she's looking for, if you will. And also, I almost always get her jewelry, but this year, because we're watching our money, we have this silly new garage and driveway going in, and that sure took a lot. And we had all the other disasters of, oh no, my windshield is broken, my water heater went out, my electric has to be worked on. So I didn't get her the nice, shiny, sparkly this year. Hopefully that'll be for our anniversary. That'll be for Christmas when we've revived our fortunes a little bit. But so I got her 11 things. We also tend to do that it's not just one or two, three things. It's, she'll have fun opening each one of them in turn, and we'll see what she likes. And I always put a little note in the front of the book with something about that year, something about the topic, et cetera, et cetera. So,
For Gina's birthday this year,
yes.
I, I got her the Prince and the Revolution, the soundtrack for Purple Rain, because it's one of her favorite albums. And I
That
got
is a
the
classic.
LP
Yes.
because she just got a record player and she's been loving just sitting in the living room and, listening to the records and having to get up and flip it and everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
I,
a
I
great
miss
album.
vinyl.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. We often talk about, we'll be speaking in various different ways. The Halloween's, that is Mensa in Chicago, their big Halloween party. It's going to be the vinyl frontier.
Yes.
And I was going to do a thing about puzzles, but actually I'm going to shift to talking about my record collection. You
Nice.
know, even before I shifted to CDs and digital and stuff like that, I had all kinds of vinyl, and there's a different experience, as we've kind of talked about in the past, with the big vinyl album and flipping it over and reading the liner notes, and that sometimes the internal sleeve actually had the lyrics printed on them, different groups. There was a gatefold thing. And so I'm kind of going to go through and pick out things from my collection. And it really is, you can easily fill an hour talking about cool covers like Hypnosis for Pink Floyd, or here's the Jethro Tull. It's an actual newspaper that makes, you know what I mean? If the songs are written about as if this little kid actually exists and it's in this town, and all kinds of other. Rick Wakeman had an album where I don't know that it's kind of funny. It came with a little silver mirrored insert, and what you would do is you'd roll it up into a tube and put it in the center, and then it makes the image on the cover look correct. So it's
That's
like a
cool.
not isomorphic, but it's something. Let's go
Right.
coolomorphic image.
Right. Right. Right.
that,
Right.
and they kept on ever just when you think they've exhausted every possible thing they can do with record albums, somebody comes up with a new. It's not just a photo of the band in a warehouse. It's they kept on doing cool things, and it. I'm going to talk about that. You know what I mean?
Which you don't
Some
get
gems
so
from my
much.
collection.
You don't get
I
that so
was
much anymore.
yeah. I I never bought bootlegs. I always back then and even still now, it like the artist gets the money. You know what I mean? All those intermediates, all those middlemen, they get a little bit, but they shouldn't be stealing. And especially boots are. So anyway, the only boot that I ever bought, because I had never seen anything like it before, was a 10 record Frank Zappa set. He did not only concerts, tours, and stuff like that, but many of his shows were different each night. They'd play with the playlist over the course of the tour, just based on Frank's moods. He would throw things in and out, and some things that were constant. When you hear the Mud Shark 3 nights in a row, it's mostly the same song, but there's a different solo and there's different band goofing off going on, based on anyway. So that's the only thing I ever bought was like, I love him live, and this is such an incredible capture. And as you might imagine, sound quality varies, depending on who had done the bootlegging and stuff. But so that's one of the things I kind of want to show off is like, look at this cool thing I
Right.
have.
Well, speaking of the album covers, the artist that did all those 70s covers for Yes with all the
Yes,
trippy looking stuff.
Roger Dean, exactly.
He went on to do video game graphics, and I had a couple of the video games, Shadow of the Beast, and that. And if you look at it, you could like, oh yeah, I recognize the style. Um,
Yes, exactly. The islands floating in space and
yeah,
waterfalls, and yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
And the bootleg stuff, I remember. It's so funny because back in the day,
Yeah.
Grateful Dead were like, yeah, whatever. They even had a section in their concert setup, bring your recorders and stuff.
Exactly that. So it was good stereophonic right behind the soundboard, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah. I mean, they kind of did that, but then most of them were like, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. Well, now everybody has a complete video audio recorder in their pocket and
that's right.
everybody's just given up. And I find that so funny because it's how things have changed and how, you know, is that one of the things that have led to the artists not making as much money and having to sell the t-shirts and posters and crap?
Right, that it comes from the
Probably.
accessories instead of the actual music. I
Yeah.
know that I have at least one like live album from Springsteen where he says, "Bootleggers, roll those tapes." He was one of the guys that he didn't fight it. He was like, well, I don't know. There's a That's the way that software worked for a long time. The whole concept of shareware was give it out as tryware.
Yeah.
If they like it, then they'll be willing to pay for it. And some people really fought that, and they were like, "No, there's no pirating. There's et cetera." And others were, "Sure, give it away, and it'll be crippleware, shareware, freeware." They actually have the whole GUI, not GUI, right? Actually, maybe it is GUI. The new license that was pretty much as long as you don't change this, you can
Yeah.
indeed give it away,
Right.
but you can't charge for it. So there
Right.
was backlash is not the right word, but there was definitely evolution of who all took those things into account. And like Linux is an incredible example of that wasn't made to make money, to compete with Windows or Macintosh or whatever else it might be. It was done because someone said, I'm just curious as to whether I can do this. I think I can do better. And so, Linus Torvalds was uh, really good at that next generation of there's all kinds of things. This is a long solved problem. If I write a perfect operating system or a perfect reporting thing for Oracle or something like that, I should be able to give it away. They're really, Oracle, you can't, and as you know, I named that company in specific because Sun and Java and all kinds of let's say call them shareware languages. There was various different ways in which they were trying to get it out so there would be mass developer adoption and so forth, but they still wanted to control the source code that was created or you know what I mean, that there was all kinds of cool legal things that had to be figured out of if you incorporate freeware into your product, can you then charge for your product or do you have to give some kind of kickback to the freeware people even if they said we don't want it? And Microsoft had to work with that, and Oracle and various other big companies had to say, this really is a perfectly written device driver, and I really want to include it in my set of device drivers or fonts or whatever, but I can't steal it, and yet they don't want any money. So what am I going to do?
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah. And, it's interesting where that's evolved from 20,
yeah,
25 years ago. The Macs, they changed their whole architecture to have the basis of Linux underneath it, totally different than what they had in the 90s. You know,
exactly. That's one of the cool things that Steve Jobs did. When he went away from Apple for a while and created B and had the perfect operating system, if you will, and then what he brought back with him, um, and I hope I'm not getting this all confused. One of the things he did was this really is more robust. It will be this kernel underneath running over everything, and really stop treating it as if the OS and the GUI is a combined thing. We can make it so that there's software layers that they're various different of human to metal, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's now like the emulation industry is based on. We can duplicate any particular part of that while still leaving the core stuff that really talks to the machine just as it is. So you get your security or you get your deep compatibility with various different hardware, and yet we can still make it look like a whole bunch of different creatures, that kind of
right.
thing. So
Right.
fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So changing gears, Black
Okay.
Widow. What'd you think?
Good, but not great.
I agree.
Um, so you know what I mean. I wanted It's my first movie in the theater in how long? 15 months, 18 months, a long time. Me and the boys went to see it. You know what I mean. I have a bunch of comic book geek friends that regularly invite like a dozen people, and half of us make it and stuff like that. It used to be that you had to go like Thursday at 12:01, midnight plus one, because they wouldn't open them before Friday. And now the movie world has said, there's money to be made here.
Right,
So
because
we went at like
it's streaming. You can watch it at
it
home.
was, and
So
that's I just read about that it was simultaneously released into theaters and streaming, and apparently like movies was 80K and streaming was 60 or the reverse. But I guess that was any kind of proof of it isn't that one cripples the other, that people will watch it based on what medium they like.
yeah,
What with some people I love. There are certain movies I really want to see in the theater because I want the big picture and the big sound and the
yes,
enveloping experience of it. And others, it's like, well, if I have it at home, I can pause when I want. I can go take a bio break, shades of Arvog and that
exactly.
kind of stuff. So I really liked as for any Marvel movie, as you might imagine, the action sequences were great. Them dealing with the history of the character and how it all kind of ties together was really well done. The last 20 minutes, this amazing fight while a city in the sky is falling apart and they're dealing with all the debris and swooping around, and it's overwhelmingly cool.
Yeah,
Having said that, there really were places where I was like, okay, we get it, move on. There was a little bit too much exposition or a little bit too much trying to humanize the characters. And maybe this is just the fanboy in me. Why is nobody blowing something up, currently? I really like that they give depth to these characters and that there really are, the struggles are not always who can punch each other, but who's got will, who's overcome demons, who's, had a bad background and yet has emerged as a hero. And so, and yet there were still times like when you ever have to think, okay, move on, or when you see people in the theater checking their watch or their
yeah.
phone, which is a curse. The fact that people check their phone in a dark theater, go to
Shoot
hell,
'em.
you bastards. So exactly, but that was my only complaint, I guess, is that could they have tightened it a little bit? Could they have
Yes.
just done a little bit less of
I,
those quieter passages and kept? I've seen movies where there's not a wasted minute, that every single thing is moving towards and surprising you and whatever else it might be. And yet this just seemed at times a little slow.
I agree. That was almost identical to my thoughts. That
Okay.
every scene or every couple moments, it was like, here's where you want to hit, and they were building, and they got here, and then they moved on, and it was just like that one little click over would make it amazing, and everything. Not that it was bad. I'm not saying it was bad. I've seen movies that are way, way, way worse. It was a great movie.
Right.
We loved it. But I wouldn't say it's like, oh my God, that's the Marvel movie I want to go watch 10 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, it's an amazing thing that they did as well as it did because, she's dead. Back in the previous Avengers movie, this is a historic movie, if you will. It
Yeah.
showed her coming to be who she is from the Red Room and so forth. And it does show the inheritance of the next Black Widow or a whole bunch of possible Black Widows. And I don't think I'm giving any spoilers away here. That's one of the things I've read so many comics that, of course, I always compare. Well, how does that compare to the comic books that I've read, which really have decades of mythology and have had some really cool first ideas and that retconning and stuff like that. And once in a while, the people that make the movies just don't get it. They don't get that this is a Jekyll Hyde story, not a Dumbo story,
Right.
and that you can't hit a clinker like that. And I think that most of this, it was true to what she had been through, that she was in the Soviet Union, that she had escaped from being turned into, a killing machine, an assassin. They had the counterpoint of the Red Guardian being like, kind of like the horse in Animal Farm, too loyal, too much a buffoon, that he really was used in his life and career, but comes through in the end because his heart is in the right place. He is a near indestructible character
Right.
and stuff like that. But I thought that they captured some good elements, but of course, as you might imagine, they leave out things that, Ivan, her driver, never makes an appearance. I don't think in any of the movies as well as here.
No.
And that relationship was always very interesting in the comics of this guy, a father figure, if you will, that's so loyal to her, and there's no romantic interest, father figure, don't go weird. And yet that's so much part of what humanized her was, in between doing these daring things and maybe these semi-illegal things, there really was someone that no matter what, I'm with you. And that showing that kind of loyalty is a good thing for humanity, kind of, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So
I
anyway.
think for me, maybe part of it was my expectations and, something different than what they were really doing. I thought it should have could have been a little more of a spy type story, and it didn't
Right.
quite get there. And even if it didn't, it could have been a little more uh, James Bond feeling, and it didn't quite do that either. It was somewhere in between several different things. I think if they would have really gone deep spy movie or deep action James Bond or something like that, they just needed they were like they were trying to decide what type of movie they wanted to make.
That's good analysis. I mean, they really mostly it was a superhero movie, and indeed, her place in the Marvel universe is as the agent, the operative. You know what I mean? That
Yeah,
she, and I guess I don't know. There was not much disguising as compared to like Mission Impossible or something where that really figures into things. Um, that's good analysis. That there really wasn't enough spycraft. I guess like breaking in, sneaking around, using ductwork. That was some kind of part of that and stuff like that. But it sure wasn't. Boy, I'll have to think about that. It could have been even better to show that she's tricky and outsmarts people, not just outfights them, et
yeah,
cetera, et cetera.
and
So, okay.
I think the part that there were a couple parts where I was like, "Oh, come on!" I could just picture all the writers in the room going, "Oh, now how do we get out of this? Well, here we'll just do this." And like when the pheromones, and she's like, "Oh, I'm going to break the thing," and she smacked her head on the table. I'm like, seriously, that to me that was like, come on, you couldn't do anything, think of anything better. It just
Right, exactly. That
that
she had pre-planned and given herself nose plugs or something like that.
yeah
And actually, that maybe that is one of the ways in which she was tricky. And again, hopefully no spoilers. Is there's a main villain in all of this, the manipulator. And when they've had scenes in the past movies where sometimes you don't have to do any intelligence work. All you gotta do is let the villain start talking, let him start blustering about his master plan. Loki did it, various others, and so maybe that's part of what goes on here is that she can play the oh no, I'm helpless, oh please don't torture me, what are you going to do? And then they just start spilling the beans. You know what I
yeah
mean?
yeah
So she has learned to use her feminine wiles, if you will, to get that reaction from someone who just can't stand be the peacock. He has to strut around a little bit,
right.
so
It was interesting to put if anyone has already gotten too spoiled, so, sorry, but it was interesting putting the red room up in the clouds and doing that. Was
right,
that was
that
an
it wasn't the
interesting.
volcano lair, that it was exactly.
Yes, that would have been great.
Another thing I like, this is kind of funny. Whenever you go to a superhero movie, they nowadays they cater the trailers to who's in the theater to see that, and so it's very nice. As you know, this is the break where now Marvel, the MCU, will go into Phase 4, and lots of things coming up. So seeing the previews for Shang-Chi,
Yeah,
and it's kind of funny that plus Snake Eyes was like, so which movie is which again? You know what I mean? The GI Joe Snake Eyes, and they had Jungle Cruise. Some of
yeah,
them, like, okay, that's not a Marvel movie, that's a Disney movie, and you can kind of tell. And yet, it's like I could see that for 2 hours. I could see
yeah.
spectacular, this boat breaks through a wall type.
So that's funny because when we saw the Jungle Cruise trailer, which we
Right.
probably will see, we like The Rock. I like the comedy stuff, so I hope it hits that really well. But I was looking at it and I'm like, what's it say that when we see the Shang-Chi Marvel superhero trailer and then we see the Jungle Cruise trailer, and the Jungle Cruise trailer has more computer graphics and stuff on it than Shang-Chi? What's that tell you?
Interesting. Exactly. You know, Shang-Chi is really, and I think it's Shang-Chi instead of Shanghai, but I
Yeah,
hope I
I
got
think
that
they
right.
said
So
Shang-Chi.
it they didn't, maybe that's supposed to be a big reveal in the movie, but he comes from interesting stock, and so I'm hoping that if they're looking for, I think how to say this, there have been various different generations of villains in the various different movies based on our international relations. For a while, like every James Bond movie was, there was a Russian protagonist. It was against Smersh or the GRU predecessor, and then for a while that we got friendly because of Gorbachev and others, and so then it was terrorists or it was Middle Eastern
Middle East,
vague
yeah.
kind of things and that kind of stuff, and then it was moguls, business moguls that were they're getting out of control, that no single nationality can handle them. And now we've returned to the Russians in some ways. You know what I mean? That when you find out that maybe they've never stopped fighting the war. They've always had their science cities and their assassin camps and that kind of stuff. And there really is a so having said that, now the Chinese are in focus because they're a major international rival. And for a while, that was a very, I don't know, cheap, easy villain in Marvel there was the Yellow Claw and Fu Manchu and the Mandarin and various different just arch yellow enemies, and they got away from that because that was well, now they might be returning. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It really is that some part of wish fulfillment is if you want to get a good villain, just throw Hitler in there. You know what I mean? If you want to get this is Hitler's clone, yeah, we still hate that too. You know what I mean? So we'll start to see some of the stereotypes played out in some ways as they bring in the international flavor of things. But then there's still, I don't know, if you're going to have anything going on in Africa, you're going to have an Idi Amin type despot who's not only
Yeah.
like a strong man, but like really likes torture, really, just did terrible things to many people and stuff like that. And I think we'll start to see that play out in the Marvel movies, that they're not an embrace of stereotypes, but they will echo in some ways what we're seeing currently.
I
You know what I mean?
agreed.
So
It fits, yeah. I mean, first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, there's end battle was supposed to be in the Twin Towers, and then the Twin Towers collapsed, and they had to refilm the whole
had to
ending
redo it all.
because
Exactly.
it needed to reflect current society.
Yeah. Yeah.
So speaking of all the Marvel stuff, have you been watching Loki?
Yes. And it's kind of funny. I just had a conversation with a friend, and I love how our conversations really do tie back. Nobody knows necessarily how a fad starts. But like, so for instance, for the Star Wars Mandalorian series, all of a sudden, everybody in the world was talking about Baby Yoda. And
Yeah,
I think that they knew that it was going to be big, but they didn't know that it would
probably not.
explode.
No.
The latest thing that I've seen is, as you know, in the Loki series, there's many Lokis. He's one of those eternal villains that has a version of him in every single of the multiverse. And yet the one that everybody's talking about is alligator Loki. Here's the alligator with the, the Loki
Absolutely.
horns. And, like, are they going to do it? Are they going to catch lightning in a bottle? Are they going to make like there's going to be a little alligator Loki plush
Well,
toys and there's going to be lunch
Colin said he'd
boxes?
take one. So, but the classic Loki, he was the coolest in the last episode. Creating
I
the
agree.
whole illusion and everything. That was pretty cool.
Exactly. And also, they got Richard Grant to do what he's really good at, which is chewing scenery. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Was it the Spy Kids movies or something like that? Maybe it was Hudson Hawk, a
Oh,
Bruce
jeez.
Willis movie that a
Yeah.
lot of people decry, but I really thought it was good. It had all kinds of funny scenes, great, etc. So they let him go over the top. They let him be both, the heroic villain, the egotist, all that kind of stuff. Like, who would have thought that someone could out Loki Tom Hiddleston? And
Yeah.
yet he really was
In that
good.
outfit. And I saw
So,
an interview quote from him that he was
okay,
laughing because when he wanted to go into acting and not stage and theater, but
right.
movies and stuff, his father said, "What do you want to wear tights all day?" And now here he is.
Exactly. Costume thingies, as they
Yeah,
call it in Great Britain. Exactly.
right. So I thought that was pretty cool. So
That's very funny.
we've got Loki one more episode tomorrow, and then we've
Right.
got the What If series, which I was thinking was like an Infinity's Legends offshoot, like the comic book that doesn't fit in. It's just
Right.
oh
It's
this
meant to be not
yeah.
in canon. Exactly.
But
Okay.
my understanding is that's not true. That they're using all of this to tie into Doctor Strange and the multiverse, and Doctor Strange may have a cameo in just about every episode.
Interesting.
So
There was not a trailer for that, and I'm really looking forward to that because if they at all capture the Steve Ditko esque multi-dimensional, little fanged mouths floating in space type thing. When I talked with P. Craig Russell a couple weekends ago, which I just, oh my God, fanboys. He really he's one of the inheritors of that ability to portray fantasy in a really convincing way so that you can, boy, this is unearthly, but it sure is detailed and like really looks like that's what a little
right, right,
multi-tentacle thing would look like. You know what I
right,
mean? So that's an interesting tie-in then that Doctor Strange definitely has been that guy that always brought in multi-dimensional, especially like evil dimensions, Dormammu and Nightmare and whatever else it might be.
right.
So if that's what they're building towards, I think I just saw that Captain Marvel is going to be in one of the
Yes,
cameos, and so
yes.
that's like what an interesting
As
contrast. She's very
Captain Marvel
scientific.
in the Captain America suit, she does,
Okay,
I believe.
yeah. One of the things I always liked about Marvel was that they didn't segregate between, okay, these are the mystic things and these are the scientific things and these are the urban gritty things. They often had those little crossovers of like, well, so what if you were Daredevil, but all of a sudden Jack the Ripper was in your town? You
Right.
know what I mean? How would you fight a vampire if you were the god of thunder or
Right.
something like that? And so I like that is science and magic just different forms of transferring energy? You know what I mean? They both have rules, and is
Right.
the textbook any different than the Necronomicon and all that kind of stuff? So
Right.
the fact that
I
they're smart enough to make that you don't immediately dismiss it. Oh, that doesn't make any sense. It's
right.
cool that they can find a way to mix it up. So
Right. I'm very interested to see where this is all leading in the MCU, because we had the first three phases with Fury gathering the team and being the go between. Now we got Julia Louise Dreyfus's character, and Colin is saying everything is pointing to the Thunderbolts, that she's gathering the Thunderbolts. So
interesting. So the villains reformed kind
yes,
of,
yeah,
and I always
because
thought that was a very interesting series. And
yes, because
Suicide Squad and stuff on the DC side, and the
Zemo and
Thunderbolts on the Marvel side.
yeah, I mean, we
Exactly.
got Zemo with Falcon and Soldier,
Hmm.
and then this last one, let's go kill Barton, which that's going to be interesting. Uh,
Exactly.
but he
Talk
also
about your
pointed out,
great cliffhanger at the end, tacked on to the end of the movie. It's like,
yeah,
wait, what? I thought that they
right,
were okay. They were like, okay.
yeah, but and that's another thing to point to, that she's not doing the Avengers, she's something else. And
Exactly.
Colin pointed out that Ross was there, and we haven't really seen him since the Hulk. And
Boy, that's good. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that he was talking about his heart and he'd had the surgeries. Well, in the comic, he overcame that by becoming the Red Hulk, who
The
joined the
Red Hulk.
Thunderbolts. So
Yeah.
Colin's
That
like,
was a
yeah,
very good reveal in the comics that they
yeah,
took their sweet time letting you know that that's who it was.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
and
So,
that they're building this up. We may not see him again for 2 or 3 more years.
yeah.
Because if they do it like they did the original, we had stuff in what, '08, and it wasn't until 12 that they all got together. So it's like 4 years of build.
Exactly.
And now they
That's,
got the TV shows too.
yeah. I'll tell you, I really love that they've overcome one of my uh, um, often spoken criticisms of early Marvel movies, and maybe it was not Marvel, it was Sony. Like, you don't need to have six villains in every Spider-Man movie. Each one of these had enough weight to carry a three-story arc in the comic books, and so you really could just have them versus the Sandman, not throw other ones in there. And now they sometimes the reason the Avengers gathered, as you know, was to fight menaces that no single hero could handle. But as they break off, it's interesting that they are taking their time and letting those. Um, One of the things I've always loved about comic books was don't binge it. You had to wait a month each time, and your mind could kind of wander and speculate and say, so what does that mean? That Storm is being pursued by Doctor Doom, not as a villain, as his villain, but like he wants to be romantic with her, and
Right.
you know what I mean? Like it. I love that they are dropping all those possibilities, and that I think that they know they must have a big old roadmap for what's going on, but it might be that they just are like, they got a writer's room and these guys put out a movie and they said, next movie, do whatever you want. We give you all kinds of material to work with,
Right.
So I love
Yeah.
that thought too, that they're kind of figuring it out while they go along and they're waiting to see what does well.
Well,
You know what
I
I mean?
think they've got an overall plan. I mean, they have to be tying all
I
this stuff
really think so
together.
too. Yeah.
And what you just said about that build up and all that, my oldest stepson and I were talking. He's the younger generation. I'm like, have you watched Loki yet? He's like, nah, I just watched Falcon and Soldier. I'm like, oh, did you like it? He said, yeah, it was okay. Well, he literally woke up on a Saturday morning, started with episode 1, and by evening he was done.
Done
And
with all of them.
yeah,
See,
and I said, see, but here's the problem. You didn't, nothing stood out to you. You were just kind of glazed over, through all of them. And I guarantee by 2 weeks from now, you'll have forgotten most of it. There was no excitement in that. It was
yeah,
literally just consuming content as if it was like every bad Philip Dick science fiction movie with, whatever into your brain, and you just
I hear you.
disregard it.
Yeah.
So,
I know we often advocate for it, but I think I really think it's important. That I've liked that I grew up like that, and I didn't mind being restricted to only one issue a month. And this is kind of funny, actually. I'll give a disrecommendation. I just read a series called World's End that was like the New 52 from DC, and it was Earth 2
Right.
having to deal with Darkseid. Boy, did it suck. It was so tone deaf for what makes each of those characters great. If you're going to have a galactic menace like that, it in every way it didn't play well with continuity. It didn't play well with what really makes those characters who they are. It was un it was tone deaf. And as I was reading through it, if I remember, I'm not sure about this, but they've had series where they came out like one little issue a week for like 52. And so sometimes then you don't get that month in between, but a week in between is still enough to digest and think of what's going to happen next. In this case, it just made it seem choppy and disconnected. And like, do you even know what you said in issue 2? And now it's issue 22 and you're already like backing away from it or actively contradicting it. And I have not seen the author who got credit, I think Daniel Johnson, on anything else. And I suspect that like he came with this big idea and we're going to find a way to like remove Earth 2 from continuity. And like, and then he removed himself from continuity too. I think this was a lead balloon that really just didn't work out. And I don't know, none of the deaths were heroic. None of the savings and heroic acts were big enough, or like there wasn't enough build up to it. So it really was, wow, that's really having to overcome difficulties. I just, I almost, it was 2 volumes and I almost turned the second one in without reading it. I
Wow.
hardly ever do that. I was actually at the library with both of them in hand, and some part of my being that completist
Just got to do
just,
it.
I'll struggle through it. If I have to page through it, if I have to, but then, and it's like, that isn't why I don't like it, because I gave it short shrift. I actually did sit down and read it, and it still didn't work for me. It just was the setup of what the earth elementals are versus the bad elementals, if you will, from Apocalypse, the avatars that they each took on. It just was, that's clumsy. That's foolish. That's not well written. The character wouldn't say that. I just, it's kind of funny. I'm so usually enthusiastic about the world of comics, and there's so much good that we can point out. But once in a while, this recommendation to like warn your friends away, boy, this was so much not worth the hours that I put into reading
Uh,
it. It just was a bum.
and what I think what then makes it worse is you get some series like Metal or something that was just like over the top and everything was cool about it. So it
Right.
makes the ho hum ones seem even worse. And
Exactly.
you can't looking at it objectively, you can't always expect everything's going to be better than the last thing and more excited because
Right.
there's a tipping point.
Yeah.
And there's
You
always
gotta
got
have
to
to take a
be
breather.
yeah, yeah. There's always got to be something that's worse, at the bottom.
Yeah.
That's why we
It's
have
funny.
lists.
Exactly. Right after I read that, and then I read a bunch of Catwoman volumes, like volume 1 through 4 of collected Catwoman from relatively recent, and it's where she has left. Again, I know it's like long ago now, so it is no spoiler. If you don't know this, then you're not really in the field. She was she's gonna be married to Batman,
Right,
and she leaves him at the altar. She can't do it. She can't give up her independence. She can't, whatever the reasons are, and they kind of explore that, and it's not just one single thing. Like, she's a troubled woman. You know what I mean? She doesn't always know why she does what she does. She knows that she's a kleptomaniac. She likes shiny things. She's learned to put this layer of authenticity, of being like properly social. She can even be a hero when the people that she's stealing from are even more villainous than her. There's nothing wrong with stealing a whole bunch of money from white slavers. Let
right.
them die. That kind of thing. And having said that, that was very well paced and good characterization of her, and the fact that while she's dealing with menace, she's also dealing with her own inner demons and stuff like that. And so it was. This is why I read comics, not that crap I just finished, but this is pretty well done. Joelle Jones, I think, and it used to be that every single artist and writer stuck. You know what I mean? I think Fernando Blanco is the artist, and because then you were like, well, now I know that I want to follow her
Looking it up.
work. When I see
Right,
her doing
right,
something else, it's like I liked her from Catwoman. I can trust her on this, and so we'll see what happens. But
right. Well, hey,
um,
we didn't get to jigsaw puzzles. We'll have to try and get
yeah.
to that next week.
It's kind of funny. I figure that our discussions always rove around just right. Whatever we
Yeah,
whatever we have as our little list of didn't get to it yet, we will. And if we
yeah.
don't, it's because, well, it turned out to be not that important, maybe.
Well, yeah.
So
Things change, so
There we go. Okay, I'm going to
All
go play hooky with Colleen, and we're going to go do our little gardens and museums and buffets and all that kind of
right,
stuff that
nice.
we tend to do for birthdays. So
Nice. Well, tell
hope
her
you have.
happy birthday.
We'll see you on Saturday. We'll finalize time for let's get together for breakfast. Let's
Yes.
make sure that we're all carbo loaded so we
Yeah.
can have our brain firing fully to solve the mystery of the Cleveland Ripper. And
Little
we'll see you on
backpack
Saturday
with
morning.
some drinks and snacks.
Exactly that. Got to keep our strength
Hats.
up.
All right,
Hats
man.
and sunscreen. That's if
Yeah.
it's at all July in Cleveland ain't that can be quite punishing.
We haven't had last week. It's rained just about every single day. I
Yeah.
mean,
I hope
geez.
we don't get a rain out on Saturday. That
No,
would be
that would
miserable. You
suck.
know what I mean? Nobody wants to pull their phones out while it's getting drenched. I hope this doesn't short out in my hand.
Right. Well, I need a new phone, so if it shorts out, then that's my excuse.
The sacrifice you're willing to make.
Yeah,
Exactly. All
it's
right.
getting wet.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knew what could happen out there?
Right. All right,
All
man.
right. Take
Talk to
care,
you later.
Stephen. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Relentless Geekery podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Steven's conversation on geek topics of the week.